20,000 years ago, night fell on a much colder Earth. Ice stretched across the northern world. Wind moved freely over open plains, and winter temperatures in many places fell as low as or colder than parts of Antarctica's frozen coast today. There were no houses, no heaters, no sealed rooms to hold warmth inside, only fire, fur, and the closeness of other people. At sunset, families gathered together beneath skins and hides. Sleep came quietly, but sleep lowers body temperature, softens awareness, and dims the signals that warn us of danger, making night the most delicate time of all. Scientists know that hypothermia often takes people while they sleep, when shivering fades and the body's defenses grow quiet. A single mistake, like a fire dying too soon, damp bedding, or a shift in wind, could decide whether morning came or not. Survival here was brutal, and yet people endured. For thousands of years, our ancestors rested beneath open skies and woke again. So, how did their bodies keep warm enough through those long frozen nights? What kept blood flowing and tissue alive while bodies lay still and unconscious? Tonight, we travel back into some of the coldest nights our species has ever faced. But before we begin, if these science stories bring you a sense of ease, please give the video a like and perhaps tap subscribe. And if you wish, let me know in the comments where you are listening from tonight and what time is it there. I love seeing how far across the world these soft explorations travel. Now take a slow breath, let your shoulders soften, and together let's drift into the long, cold nights that humanity learned to endure. When the sun sank during the Ice Age, the world did not simply dim, it changed its rules. Daylight had offered a thin margin of stability, a brief window when the land absorbed what little warmth the sky could spare. The ground, even when frozen, held a trace of that energy. Air moved more slowly, muscles stayed looser, breath felt less sharp, but night erased those small advantages with quiet efficiency, draining heat from soil, stone, and skin until the landscape settled into a deeper, more dangerous state. Cold thickened after sunset. Without sunlight, the air near the ground cooled rapidly and grew heavier, sliding downhill into valleys and open plains. What had been survivable during the day hardened into something far more aggressive. Heat no longer rose from the earth. Instead, it was drawn away, pulled outward and upward, layer by layer, from anything warm enough to offer it. A resting human body became a beacon in that exchange, quietly bleeding warmth into the dark. Wind magnified this loss. Across the open tundra, nothing slowed its movement. There were no forests dense enough to soften its reach, no terrain gentle enough to break its flow. Wind stripped warmth from skin and clothing alike, carrying it off faster than the body could replace it. It slid through loose fibers, curled around limbs, and pressed cold air into every small opening. Even sheltered spaces felt its presence, creeping through seams and gaps, finding its way inside. Exposure was not dramatic. It did not arrive all at once. It worked patiently, minute by minute, cooling fingers first, then toes, then deeper tissues. The body responded by narrowing blood vessels near the skin, redirecting warmth toward vital organs. Hands stiffened, sensation dulled. Movement slowed. This was not failure yet, only conservation, the body trying to outlast the night with what it had left. Darkness made all of this more dangerous. Without light, distance collapsed, the horizon disappeared. Snow, ice, and stone blurred together, erasing visual cues that guided movement and decision. Orientation became fragile. A short walk could drift off course. A familiar shelter could vanish into shadow. In daylight, mistakes could be corrected. At night, Errors lingered, quietly accumulating as heat drained away. Temperature does not attack the body directly, it changes how the body behaves. Chemical reactions slow, muscles lose efficiency, nerves transmit signals less clearly, blood thickens as it cools, moving more reluctantly through narrowed vessels. The heart works harder to push it along. Small areas, ears, fingers, cheeks, become isolated, starved of warmth to protect deeper systems. Tissue there begins to stiffen, not yet frozen, but no longer resilient. As hours passed, stillness became its own hazard. Motion generates heat, but motion also consumes energy. Balance had to be found between rest and waste. The body, lying close to the ground, surrendered warmth through contact, stone and soil drawing it away steadily. Breath condensed in the air, each exhale a small cloud of lost heat. Inhaling brought cold deep into the lungs, cooling from the inside out. Ice Age nights were not loud or violent, they were quiet, expansive, and patient. The cold did not rush, it waited, it spread evenly across the land, settling into every hollow and crevice, pressing gently but persistently against anything alive. Survival depended on understanding this rhythm, on anticipating what darkness would take and what it would leave behind long before the first stars appeared. As night deepened, danger did not arrive through violence or sudden change. It entered through stillness. Sleep, which normally restores and protects, quietly altered the balance between the body and the cold. While awake, even small movements produced warmth. Muscles tightened and released, posture shifted, hands flexed, awareness kept the mind engaged with discomfort, prompting adjustments before damage began. In sleep, those subtle defenses faded, and the body slipped into a state where cold could work more efficiently. Core temperature naturally drifts downward during sleep. This is part of the body's rhythm, a controlled lowering meant to conserve energy and deepen rest. In gentle climates, the change is barely noticeable. In extreme cold, the drop carried consequences. Each fraction of lost warmth reduced the margin between stability and failure. The body did not register this as danger. It followed its internal clock, slowing processes that had once helped resist the night. Shivering, one of the body's most powerful sources of heat, also weakened. When awake, shivering was sharp and immediate, a full body response driven by the brain's alert systems. During sleep, those signals softened, shivering became uneven, delayed, sometimes stopping altogether. Muscles relaxed rather than contracting. The energy once burned to create warmth was conserved instead, leaving temperature to fall without resistance. Awareness vanished completely. Cold numbed sensation first, dulling the sharp edges of discomfort until signals from the skin arrived slowly, or not at all. Fingers and toes lost feedback. The warning ache of cold gave way to heaviness, then quiet absence. Without awareness, the body could no longer respond to changing conditions. A shift in wind, a loss of insulation, a small opening in shelter passed unnoticed. What might have prompted movement while awake became invisible while asleep. This is why hypothermia so often unfolded during rest. It did not announce itself with pain or panic. It progressed as a gentle slowing. Metabolism declined. Breathing became shallower. Blood flow pulled inward, abandoning the surface to preserve the center. The brain, cooling along with the body, reduced its demands, slipping deeper into sleep as conditions worsened. The transition from rest to danger occurred without interruption. During the Ice Age, this vulnerability shaped every night. Darkness already removed sight and distance. Sleep removed agency. A resting body could not adapt. It could not seek shelter, tend fire, or share warmth without external support. Once settled, it relied entirely on preparation made hours earlier. The environment took over from there, deciding what would be lost before morning arrived. The ground continued to draw heat steadily. Air temperatures dropped further after midnight, when the land had fully surrendered the day's remaining warmth. Frost thickened, wind patterns shifted with cooling layers of atmosphere. These changes mattered little to the sleeping body, which adjusted slowly, if at all. What warmth remained was spent maintaining the core, leaving extremities to stiffen and cool. Ice Age humans were most vulnerable at this moment, not while traveling or hunting, but while lying still beneath the dark. Survival depended on reducing how much the body had to fight while unconscious. The night rewarded balance and punished excess. Too much exposure and heat vanished. Too much exhaustion and defenses weakened further. Sleep was necessary, but it came at a cost that could only be paid through careful control of the environment. In these hours, survival was no longer an active struggle. It became a quiet negotiation between biology and physics, carried out without awareness, muscle, or thought, while the cold waited patiently for the body to slow just enough. By nightfall, survival no longer belonged to individuals. It belonged to the camp as a whole. Every body rested inside a fragile system made of warmth, shelter, and timing, each part depending on the others to hold through the dark. In daylight, small failures could be noticed and repaired. After sleep settled in, those same failures carried weight far beyond their size, spreading quietly from one person to the next. Fire sat at the center of this balance, not as comfort, but as regulation. Its heat slowed the loss of warmth from skin and breath, softened the air inside shelters, and kept moisture from settling into cold surfaces. When it burned low, the change was subtle at first. Temperatures dipped only slightly, air grew heavier, breath cooled more sharply, but without tending, flames collapsed inward, ash covering embers, and warmth vanished faster than it could be felt. Once the fire died, there was no gradual transition. The camp crossed an invisible line where every resting body began losing heat at the same time. Bedding carried equal importance. Layers of hides, grasses, or fibers trapped pockets of still air, holding warmth close while separating bodies from frozen ground. Dry bedding resisted heat loss. Wet bedding did the opposite. Moisture flattened insulation, squeezing out air and pulling warmth directly from the body. Water conducted heat away far more efficiently than air ever could. A single damp layer beneath several sleepers could chill an entire shared space. The cold did not remain isolated. It spread outward, moving from contact point to contact point, sinking deeper as hours passed. Wind could turn safety into exposure without warning. A shift in direction altered pressure around shelters, forcing cold air through openings that had once been shielded. Small gaps widened under sustained flow. Smoke changed behavior. Heat drifted unevenly. The inside temperature dropped in patches rather than evenly, creating cold zones where bodies surrendered warmth faster. Sleep masked these changes. No one stirred to adjust walls or block seams. The wind worked uninterrupted, reshaping the interior long before dawn. Because warmth was shared, failure multiplied. One person losing heat affected those nearby. Cooling bodies drew warmth from neighbors through contact. A weaker sleeper shivered less, producing less heat, becoming a drain rather than a source. Children, elders, and the injured were especially vulnerable, but their vulnerability did not remain contained. The camp functioned as a single thermal body. When one part cooled, the entire system shifted to compensate. This interdependence meant mistakes carried consequences far beyond their cause. A fire not tended before sleep risked everyone. Bedding poorly placed beneath one sleeper threatened all who lay nearby. A shelter wall loosened by wind endangered the group without announcing itself. Survival depended on anticipating these failures before rest began, when awareness still remained and adjustments could be made deliberately. By morning, outcomes were already decided. Hypothermia did not need dramatic collapse. It unfolded through cumulative loss, body temperature falling just enough, circulation slowing just enough, awareness never returning. Camps that endured through countless nights did so by preserving redundancy, overlapping layers of protection that allowed one failure to be absorbed without collapse. Camps that did not vanish quietly, leaving little trace beyond abandoned tools and scattered remains. Ice Age nights rewarded precision and punished neglect. The margin between survival and disaster was not measured in grand events, but in small decisions made hours earlier. Once sleep arrived, the camp could only hold or fail as a whole, bound together by warmth, breath, and the quiet physics of cold waiting for the first weakness to appear. When cold pressed in and the night settled fully around the camp, the human body did not surrender immediately. It responded through a quiet sequence of internal shifts, ancient and automatic, shaped by evolution to buy time rather than guarantee safety. These responses worked together, layered and subtle, each one offering small protection while slowly draining the body's reserves. Shivering was the most visible of these efforts. It began as a faint trembling in large muscles, almost imperceptible at first. Beneath the skin, muscle fibers contracted and released in rapid cycles, burning fuel to create warmth. This heat did not spread evenly. It gathered near the core, protecting the organs that could not fail. Limbs received less, stiffening as energy was rationed inward. Shivering was effective, but costly. It consumed calories quickly, turning stored energy into fleeting warmth that vanished into the surrounding air. At the same time, blood flow rearranged itself. Vessels near the skin narrowed, reducing circulation to the surface. This slowed heat loss but altered sensation, leaving hands and feet pale and numb. The body accepted discomfort in exchange for survival, allowing extremities to cool while shielding the chest and abdomen. Blood moved deeper, looping tightly around the heart and lungs, where temperature mattered most. This redistribution was not precise. It was a blunt adjustment, protective but uneven, leaving certain tissues exposed to damage if the cold persisted. Metabolism shifted next. Chemical reactions inside cells accelerated in an attempt to produce more heat. The liver released glucose. Fat stores were broken down and converted into energy. Breathing deepened slightly, drawing in oxygen to support the increased demand. This internal furnace burned steadily, invisible but relentless. As long as fuel remained, warmth could be generated. Once fuel dwindled, the fire faded quietly. These systems worked best while the body remained alert. Conscious movement added heat. Awareness prompted posture changes that reduced exposure. Small adjustments prolonged balance. During sleep, many of these advantages diminished. Shivering weakened. Metabolism slowed. The body chose conservation over production, preserving energy for the hours ahead rather than spending it all at once. This decision was normally beneficial. In extreme cold, it narrowed the margin further. Fragility lay not in any single mechanism, but in their limits. Each response depended on energy, hydration, and time. Shivering required muscle strength. Blood flow changes risk tissue damage if prolonged. Metabolic heat relied on stored fuel that could not be replenished overnight. None of these systems created warmth from nothing. They only redirected and spent what already existed. Cold exploited these constraints patiently. As hours passed, fuel burned away, circulation slowed further, Chemical reactions lost efficiency as temperature dropped. The very processes meant to protect life weakened under the conditions they were resisting. This was not failure by design, but a reflection of what the human body truly is, adapted for flexibility rather than extremes. In the Ice Age, survival depended on ensuring these internal systems did not face the night alone. The body could delay cold's advance, but it could not defeat it without help. Warmth had to be conserved before sleep began. Energy had to be stored through food. Exposure had to be limited so that shivering and metabolism did not exhaust themselves too early. When conditions were right, the body endured. When they were not, its careful balancing act unraveled quietly. Through these responses, the human body revealed both its resilience and its vulnerability. It could slow the cold, negotiate with it, and hold it at bay for hours. It could not endure indefinitely. Survival came not from the strength of these systems alone, but from how carefully they were supported, night after night, as the cold pressed inward and waited for the smallest imbalance to appear. By the time Ice Age nights settled into their deepest cold, one truth remained quietly evident in every camp. The human body was never meant to face this environment on its own. Unlike the creatures that shared the frozen plains, humans arrived with a form shaped for balance and flexibility rather than insulation. That difference did not prevent survival, but it did define its limits. Human skin offered little natural protection. Without dense fur, the surface of the body released heat freely into the surrounding air. Skin radiated warmth continuously, especially when exposed to wind or moisture. Where fur-bearing animals trapped layers of still air close to their bodies, humans relied on a thin boundary that surrendered energy as quickly as it produced it. Even when blood flow narrowed at the surface, heat escaped steadily through bare skin, turning every uncovered area into a quiet loss. Body shape added to this challenge. Human limbs are long and narrow compared to those of cold-adapted animals. Arms and legs extended away from the core, increasing surface area through which warmth could escape. Fingers and toes cooled rapidly, drawing blood away from these extremities to protect the chest and abdomen. This structure favored endurance, walking, and heat release during exertion, traits well suited for warmer climates and persistence hunting. In severe cold, those same traits became liabilities. Heat loss followed simple physical rules. The greater the surface area, the faster warmth dispersed. The taller and leaner the body, the more difficult it became to maintain a stable internal temperature when conditions stripped heat relentlessly. This was not a flaw in design, but a reflection of where human ancestors evolved. Their bodies balanced heat retention with cooling ability, prioritizing versatility over specialization. Even fat distribution played a role. Humans store energy beneath the skin and around organs, but not in thick insulating layers. Fat provided fuel more than insulation. It could be converted into warmth through metabolism, but it did not slow heat loss at the surface the way dense blubber or fur could. This meant the body could burn fuel quickly yet still lose warmth faster than it could be replaced. Because of these traits, biology alone could not solve the problem of Ice Age cold. Internal mechanisms delayed failure, but they could not overcome constant exposure. Survival required external solutions that reshaped the environment rather than the body. Technology became an extension of physiology, supplying what anatomy could not. Clothing replaced fur. Carefully arranged hides trapped air where skin could not. Shelter shortened limbs by curling bodies inward, reducing exposed surface. Fire acted as an artificial sun, returning warmth to spaces that would otherwise drain it away. Bedding lifted bodies from frozen ground, interrupting the silent pull of cold through contact. These tools worked together, compensating for biological limits without changing the body itself. In this way, humans survived not by becoming something else, but by surrounding themselves with systems that mirrored what they lacked. Technology did not overpower nature. It softened its edges just enough to allow fragile biology to persist. The body continued to lose heat, but more slowly. Energy continued to burn, but with purpose rather than panic. The Ice Age revealed the human form for what it truly was: adaptable but incomplete. Survival did not come from physical dominance or natural insulation, but from recognizing vulnerability and responding to it. Each layer of clothing, each controlled flame, each carefully shaped shelter stood as quiet evidence that humanity endured the cold, not because it was built for it, but because it learned to reshape the night around itself. As darkness settled fully around the camp, fire became more than a tool. It became a boundary, a narrow zone where the night loosened its grip. Within its reach, cold slowed, shadows softened, and air itself changed character. Outside that circle, the Ice Age continued unbroken. Inside it, life held its ground for a few more hours. Heat was the fire's most obvious gift, but it did not spread evenly. Warmth rose, collected beneath shelter roofs, and drifted outward in slow currents. It wrapped hands and faces first, then sank deeper, easing stiffness in muscles and joints. Even when bodies slept, fire continued to work, releasing stored energy steadily rather than all at once. This gentle persistence mattered more than intensity. A constant low heat preserved balance far better than brief bursts of warmth. Light carried a different kind of protection. Fire pushed back the dark without banishing it, revealing just enough of the surrounding world to keep it known. Shapes remained visible. Movements could be noticed. The edge of the camp stayed defined. In a landscape where night erased distance, this glow maintained a sense of place. The camp did not dissolve into the tundra. It remained anchored, visible to itself. Predators responded to that light. Many kept their distance, wary of flame and shifting shadows. Fire announced that the ground nearby was occupied, active, defended. This reduced the need for constant vigilance, allowing rest without complete surrender. Even when predators passed near, they circled the light rather than crossing it, respecting a boundary shaped more by instinct than understanding. Fire also transformed the air. Cold breath entering the lungs was tempered slightly as it passed through warmer space. Moisture behaved differently near heat, lifting and drifting away rather than settling into frost. Inside shelters, smoke and warmth mixed carefully, warming inhaled air just enough to reduce strain on the body. This subtle change mattered during long hours of rest, when each breath influenced internal temperature. Because of this, fire was placed deliberately. It was not simply lit wherever fuel allowed. Its position shaped the entire camp. Too far from sleepers, and its benefits weakened. Too close, and smoke thickened or bedding dried too quickly, creating new risks. Placement became tradition, refined over generations, guided by experience rather than measurement. Each arrangement reflected an understanding of how heat moved, how air flowed, how bodies rested. Throughout the night, fire demanded attention. It could not be trusted blindly. Fuel needed to be chosen, arranged, replenished. Embers had to be protected from wind and moisture. This care extended survival beyond the moment of ignition, stretching warmth across the longest hours when sleep dulled awareness. A well-tended fire outlasted rest itself, carrying the camp through its most vulnerable phase. Over time, fire shaped nightly rhythm. Evening preparations revolved around it. Bedding and bodies arranged themselves in relation to its glow. Stories, Gestures and quiet coordination unfolded within its reach. Even as eyes closed and breathing slowed, fire remained active, continuing work that sleeping bodies could not. In the Ice Age, fire did not conquer the night, it negotiated with it. It carved out a narrow refuge where biology could endure conditions it was never designed to face alone. Every surviving morning began with embers still breathing faintly in ash, evidence that warmth, light, and patience had held together just long enough for the sun to return. Not every night ended with embers still glowing beneath ash. Across the Ice Age world, there were evenings when fire failed to hold, and when it did, the consequences unfolded without drama or noise. Warmth faded first, then structure, then life itself. What remained by morning was silence, and in many places, nothing more. Archaeology preserves these moments indirectly. Camps appear in the record as incomplete stories. Hearths are found cold and shallow, their final burns brief and uneven. Tools lie where they were last set down, not gathered or packed for movement. Bedding layers thin abruptly, as if abandoned mid-use rather than dismantled with care. In some sites, ash scatters outward without pattern, suggesting wind claimed the fire rather than hands tending it. These traces speak softly of nights that did not carry through. When fire went out, temperature inside shelters shifted rapidly. The buffered air cooled, moisture settled, and the ground resumed its steady pull of heat. Bodies that had rested in balance crossed into loss without warning. Hypothermia did not arrive all at once. It crept in as circulation slowed and heat production weakened. Muscles stiffened, breathing shallowed. The brain, cooling along with the body, reduced effort rather than increasing it. Sleep deepened instead of breaking. In these conditions, death often came without visible struggle. There are no signs of hurried movement, no rearranged spaces. People remained where they had laid themselves down. Children were found close to adults. Tools stayed untouched. The night did not provoke panic. It allowed the body to drift beyond its limits while awareness remained absent. Fire's failure exposed how narrow the margin truly was. Without warmth, every protective layer lost effectiveness. Bedding compressed and chilled, clothing trapped less air. Shelters designed to retain heat became hollow shells, slowing loss only slightly. The cold that had been held at bay returned with quiet certainty, reclaiming space inch by inch. Ice Age nights offered no forgiveness for error. A storm that dampened fuel, a sudden wind that scattered embers, an illness that prevented tending. These were not dramatic events, but ordinary disruptions that crossed a delicate threshold. Once crossed, recovery was unlikely. Rekindling fire required movement, coordination, and energy, all of which diminished rapidly as bodies cooled. Some camps show evidence of this chain unfolding across hours. Ash layers suggest multiple small attempts to revive flame, each weaker than the last. Fuel was added too late, or in pieces too small. Eventually, effort ceased. The fire died completely, and with it, the last external defense against the night. Not all losses are preserved. Many camps simply vanished, leaving no trace strong enough to endure. Wind scattered remains, snow covered shallow signs, time erased evidence entirely. What archaeology retains is only a fraction, enough to suggest that survival was never guaranteed, even for those who understood the rules of cold well. Ice Age nights did not punish ignorance alone. They demanded constant precision. Fire required care not just to start, but to sustain through the longest hours. When that care faltered, biology followed physics rather than intention. Heat flowed outward, energy drained inward. Life slowed and then stopped without spectacle. These moments remind us that endurance in the Ice Age was built night by night, not through strength, but through vigilance that could not afford rest. Fire was never background. It was the difference between a camp that greeted dawn and one that quietly disappeared before the sky began to lighten again. With time and repetition, Ice Age camps began to show a quiet refinement. Fire was no longer treated as a simple source of heat, but as something that could be shaped, directed, and multiplied through space. What emerged were the earliest heating systems, not built from machinery, but from understanding how warmth moved and how air could be guided to hold it. Fire placement became deliberate. Flames were set low, often slightly off center, allowing heat to spread laterally instead of rushing upward and disappearing into the dark. Positioned near sleeping areas but not within them, fire created a shared envelope of warmth rather than isolated pockets. This arrangement reduced temperature extremes across the shelter, allowing bodies to lose heat more slowly and evenly through the night. Surfaces surrounding the fire took on new importance. Stone, packed earth, and bone reflected and stored warmth, releasing it back into the air long after flames softened. Cave walls were especially effective. Thick rock absorbed heat during active burning, then returned it gradually, turning shelters into reservoirs rather than temporary refuges. Even after fire dimmed, the walls continued to breathe warmth outward, softening the hours before dawn. In open camps, reflective structures served a similar role. Upright bones, stone slabs, and earth banks were arranged behind fires to bounce heat inward. These simple barriers redirected energy that would otherwise be lost to wind and night sky. The effect was subtle but constant, increasing the reach of fire without increasing fuel consumption. Heat lingered where people lay instead of dissolving into darkness. Air itself became part of the system. Warm air rose slowly from the fire, collecting beneath shelter ceilings and spreading outward before cooling and descending. This circulation tempered the space rather than just skin. Breathing felt less sharp. Moisture stayed suspended instead of freezing onto surfaces. The camp became a small, controlled climate, warmer not only near the flame, but throughout the shelter. Caves amplified this effect. Their enclosed forms limited heat escape while guiding airflow naturally. Entrances were sometimes narrowed or angled, reducing wind intrusion and allowing warmer air to pool inside. Smoke followed gentle currents upward and outward, clearing breath without carrying heat away too quickly. Inside these spaces, the night pressed less aggressively, held at bay by geometry as much as by flame. Over generations, this knowledge settled into habit. Fire was placed where it could serve many bodies at once. Shelters were shaped to hold air rather than simply block wind. Materials were chosen for how they behaved after the fire dimmed, not just while it burned. These systems required no tools beyond careful observation and memory, but they transformed survival. This approach changed how nights were endured. Heat became communal and atmospheric rather than individual. People slept not clutching warmth, but resting within it. The effort of staying alive shifted from constant movement to thoughtful preparation. Energy could be conserved. Sleep could deepen without crossing into danger. The first heating systems were quiet inventions. They did not announce themselves as breakthroughs. They revealed their value only over time, through mornings that returned and camps that remained intact. By warming the air itself, not just hands or faces, Ice Age humans extended the reach of fire beyond its flames. They built environments where fragile bodies could persist through the longest nights, held gently within warmth shaped by understanding rather than strength. As nights deepened and cold settled into the land, Shelter became more than cover, it became a way of shaping warmth itself. Ice Age shelters were not built to block winter entirely, but to slow its reach, to bend its movement just enough for fragile heat to remain present through the longest hours of rest. Caves offered the most immediate advantage. Their mass mattered. Thick stone walls absorbed warmth slowly and released it just as slowly, creating a steadier interior climate than the open air could ever allow. Once warmed by fire and bodies, a cave resisted rapid change. Cold from outside pressed inward but lost strength as it moved through layers of rock. Inside, temperature dropped gently rather than sharply, giving sleeping bodies time to conserve energy without sudden loss. The shape of caves also guided air. Entrances acted as controlled openings rather than gaps. Warm air pooled deeper inside, while colder air settled closer to the ground near openings. This quiet separation allowed shelters to remain livable, even as outside temperatures plunged. Smoke and breath followed predictable paths, rising and drifting outward while warmth lingered where people rested. In places without caves, hide tents served a similar purpose through different means. Stretched animal skins formed flexible walls that blocked wind while trapping air inside. Layers mattered. Overlapping hides created pockets of stillness, reducing airflow that would otherwise carry heat away. When properly arranged, these tents softened the cold rather than confronting it directly, allowing warmth to circulate slowly within their curved forms. The ground beneath tents was treated carefully. Bedding lifted bodies away from frozen soil, while tent floors were often layered with insulating materials. Combined, these choices prevented heat from draining downward, one of the fastest paths to hypothermia. The tent did not create warmth, but it prevented it from vanishing too quickly, turning the interior into a shared thermal space. Bone huts represented another step in refinement. Built from large animal bones arranged into domed frames, these shelters held shape against wind and snow. Covered with hides and packed with insulating layers, bone huts enclosed small volumes of air that warmed easily and cooled slowly. Their rounded forms minimized surface area exposed to the night, reducing heat loss in all directions at once. Small spaces proved especially effective. The less air contained within a shelter, the easier it was to warm and maintain. Body heat accumulated. Fire, when present, affected the entire interior rather than disappearing into vast emptiness. Even without active flames, clustered bodies within confined spaces generated enough warmth to slow cooling across hours of sleep. These shelters worked because they respected scale. Instead of fighting the climate by building larger barriers, Ice Age humans built inward. They reduced space to what was necessary, allowing warmth to matter. Walls, whether stone, hide, or bone, existed not to exclude the cold entirely, but to delay it long enough for dawn to return. Over time, shelter design reflected deep familiarity with night. Entrances faced away from prevailing winds. Openings were narrowed deliberately. Interiors were shaped to guide airflow rather than resist it. Every curve and layer carried memory, refined through seasons that rewarded careful construction. Through caves, tents, and huts, Ice Age humans learned to hold warmth in place. They shaped environments that worked with their biology rather than against it. Inside these small, quiet spaces, cold lost its urgency. The night still arrived, but it arrived softened, slowed, and held at a distance just long enough for life to endure until light returned once more. As the night settled into stillness, danger did not only come from wind or falling temperature, it rose silently from below. The ground, frozen and unyielding, became one of the most efficient thieves of warmth Ice Age humans faced. Air could be endured for hours with care, but contact with frozen earth worked steadily and without pause, draining heat faster than the body could replace it. Frozen soil behaved differently than cold air. Air carried warmth away gradually, slowed by layers of clothing and stillness. The ground did not wait. It drew heat directly through contact, pulling energy from flesh and bone with persistent efficiency. This process unfolded invisibly. There was no sensation at first, only a deepening chill that crept upward from wherever skin or bedding met the earth. Heat transfer followed simple physical laws. Warmth always moved toward cold, and the colder and denser the surface, the faster that movement became. Frozen soil, packed with ice and minerals, offered a direct path for heat to escape. A resting body pressed against it created continuous contact, allowing warmth to flow outward minute by minute. Unlike air, the ground did not warm easily. It absorbed heat without changing, an endless sink beneath the sleeper. This loss was most severe during stillness. Movement generated warmth and limited prolonged contact. Sleep removed both defenses. Once the body settled, pressure fixed skin and muscle against the cold surface. Blood vessels constricted in response, reducing circulation to exposed areas, which only worsened the problem. As heat left the core through contact, the body struggled to maintain balance without awareness or motion. Bedding changed this relationship entirely. Even thin layers of grass, moss, or hides introduced air between body and ground. Air disrupted the direct path of heat transfer, slowing its escape. Each layer added resistance, buying time for internal heat production to keep pace. Without that barrier, the ground claimed warmth relentlessly. This danger was not evenly felt across the body. Areas carrying more weight lost heat faster. Hips, shoulders, and backs became primary points of loss, drawing warmth from deeper tissues as the night progressed. What began as surface cooling extended inward, lowering core temperature without obvious warning signs. Frozen ground also affected moisture. Breath condensed near the surface. Melted frost refroze beneath bodies. Dampness flattened insulation and increased conductivity, accelerating heat loss even further. What seemed like a small change beneath bedding could tip the balance hours later when energy reserves were already depleted. Ice Age camps learned this lesson deeply. Sleeping directly on the earth became something to avoid whenever possible. Elevated platforms, layered floors, and thick bedding were not comforts but safeguards. Even inside caves or tents, the ground remained cold, indifferent to shelter overhead. Protection required deliberate separation. Those who lacked it paid quietly. Archaeological sites show signs of careful shelter construction paired with thick ground layers, suggesting knowledge passed across generations. Camps without such preparation often appear short-lived, abandoned without signs of return. The ground offered no second chances. In the Ice Age, air could be shaped, warmed, and slowed. Fire softened it, shelters guided it, clothing worked against it. The ground could only be resisted by distance. Without that separation, sleep became a slow exchange, where warmth flowed outward until the body could no longer follow it. Understanding this turned the night from an unavoidable threat into something manageable. By lifting themselves away from frozen earth, humans reduced one of the fastest paths to hypothermia. Survival depended not only on what surrounded the body, but on what lay beneath it, silent and waiting, ready to take warmth the moment contact was made. As understanding deepened, Ice Age nights became shaped not only by fire and shelter, but by what lay directly beneath the body. Bedding emerged quietly, assembled from the landscape itself, and it changed the meaning of rest. What had once been a dangerous surrender to the cold became a controlled pause, where warmth could be preserved rather than lost. Grass was often the first layer. When gathered thickly, dried stems bent without breaking, holding small pockets of air between them. These spaces mattered more than the material itself. Air resisted the movement of heat, slowing the steady pull of cold from the ground. A mat of grass lifted the body slightly, just enough to interrupt direct contact with frozen soil. It compressed under weight, but even flattened, it performed its work through stillness. Moss followed. In damp environments, it offered something grass could not. Moss retained structure even when compressed, maintaining insulation while managing moisture. It absorbed water that would otherwise soak into bedding, preventing dampness from spreading upward into clothing and skin. When layered properly, moss created a barrier that stayed resilient through the night, protecting warmth without clinging cold. Leaves added another dimension. Dried leaves, stacked loosely, created thick cushions that trapped air in abundance. Their irregular shapes prevented tight compression, maintaining loft even beneath sleeping bodies. As the night passed, leaves shifted slightly, settling into forms that distributed weight evenly. This reduced pressure points where heat loss would otherwise concentrate, allowing warmth to remain balanced across the body. Animal hides brought bedding into a new phase. Fur trapped air more efficiently than plant matter alone. When placed with fur facing inward, hides formed dense insulating layers that reflected body heat back toward the sleeper. The leather side resisted moisture and contact with cold surfaces below. Hides also moved with the body, maintaining coverage as sleepers shifted during the night, preserving insulation without conscious effort. Layering became essential. No single material solved the problem alone. Grass lifted, moss managed moisture, leaves added thickness, hides sealed warmth near the skin. Together, these layers worked as a system, each compensating for the limits of the others. The body rested within air held in place, protected from the ground that waited below to draw heat away. Bedding also changed how sleep unfolded. With insulation beneath them, people could relax into stillness without immediate loss. Shivering diminished, energy consumption slowed, sleep deepened without crossing into danger. The body's internal systems no longer worked alone, but in partnership with carefully arranged materials. This shift altered survival itself. Nights became more predictable. Camps endured longer in one place. Children and elders rested more safely. Energy saved overnight could be spent during the day on movement, hunting, and learning rather than recovery from cold stress. Bedding did not create warmth, but it preserved it with remarkable efficiency. Archaeological sites reveal this quiet innovation through layered floors and compacted plant remains beneath living areas. These traces suggest repetition and intention. Knowledge passed through memory and demonstration rather than instruction. Bedding became tradition, refined by nights that taught without words. Through grass, moss, leaves, and hides, Ice Age humans learned to shape the invisible space between body and ground. Insulation turned sleep from a gamble into a practice. It did not erase the cold, but it slowed it enough to allow fragile warmth to last until morning light returned, soft and patient, to the frozen world outside. As nights stretched across the Ice Age landscape, survival depended not only on shelters and fire, but on proximity. The human body produced warmth continuously, even at rest, and that warmth did not vanish into the dark immediately. It lingered, radiating outward in soft layers. When bodies lay close together, these layers overlapped, creating shared pockets of heat that no individual could sustain alone. Sleeping alone broke this balance. A solitary body released warmth into open air, losing it in all directions at once. Without neighboring heat sources, the surrounding air cooled faster, and the gradient between body and environment steepened. Heat flowed outward with little resistance. Even with bedding and shelter, isolation increased loss simply by exposing more surface area to the cold. When people slept together, the physics changed. Bodies pressed close, reduced exposed skin. Warm air trapped between them resisted movement, slowing the escape of heat. This collective warmth softened the night, turning many small sources of heat into a single shared reserve. The group became a living thermal mass, warmer and more stable than any one person could be. This mattered most during sleep. When individual defenses weakened, shivering slowed, awareness faded, metabolic heat production dropped. In those hours, external warmth mattered more than internal effort. Shared body heat compensated for what biology temporarily surrendered, allowing each person to drift through the night without crossing into dangerous loss. Group sleeping also balanced vulnerability. Not every body produced heat equally. Children, elders, and the injured generated less warmth and lost it more quickly. Left alone, their nights were shorter and harsher. Within a group, stronger bodies buffered weaker ones. Warmth flowed passively through contact, redistributing energy without effort or intention. Survival became collective rather than individual. This closeness extended beyond direct contact. Bodies arranged in circles or clusters created warmer interior air, shielding those at the center from drafts and cooling surfaces. Even slight rearrangements affected temperature distribution. A person's shifting position changed airflow. A new sleeper altered how warmth pooled beneath shelter roofs. Over time, these patterns became familiar, adjusted instinctively rather than planned. Sleeping together also reduced heat loss to the ground. Bodies pressed close shared insulation beneath them, reducing contact points with frozen soil. Weight distributed across shared bedding compressed it less severely, preserving trapped air. The cold below encountered more resistance when warmth was concentrated rather than scattered. Archaeological traces hint at these practices through clustered sleeping areas and shared bedding layers. The remains suggest not crowding, but intentional closeness, repeated night after night. This arrangement required trust and coordination, but it offered stability in return. Warmth became a social resource, passed quietly through proximity. Sleeping alone also carried risks beyond temperature. Illness, injury, or fatigue could render a solitary sleeper unable to respond to subtle changes, such as shifting wind or failing fire. Within a group, movement or disturbance by one body could alert others unconsciously. Shared sleep created a network of subtle cues, allowing the camp to respond even when awareness was limited. In the Ice Age, rest was not private, it was shared out of necessity. Bodies formed protective constellations, turning vulnerability into resilience through closeness. Survival was shaped not only by what people built or carried, but by how they gathered in the dark. Through heat sharing and shared warmth, human groups transformed the night into something manageable, holding life together through simple contact until light returned once more. Among all who rested through Ice Age nights, infants faced the narrowest margin. Their bodies lost heat faster than they could replace it, not through weakness, but through proportion. Small size meant greater surface area relative to mass, allowing warmth to escape quickly into the surrounding air. Thin layers of fat offered little insulation. Muscles were not yet capable of sustained shivering. Left alone, the night pressed inward with quiet speed. Breathing alone carried risk. Each small breath exchanged precious warmth with the cold, cooling the chest from within. Circulation favored survival of the core, but there was little reserve to draw from. Limbs chilled rapidly, skin cooled within minutes. Without intervention, the balance tipped quickly away from life. Survival depended on closeness. Babies were kept against warm bodies, pressed skin to skin where heat moved directly rather than through open air. This contact reduced exposed surface, shielding fragile skin from drafts and stillness. Heat transferred steadily from adult to child, not in bursts, but through constant shared warmth. The infant did not need to generate heat, it only needed to hold it. Skin to skin contact also stabilized breathing and circulation. The rhythm of another body provided subtle cues, guiding breath and heart rate toward steadiness. Warmth traveled inward rather than outward. Blood vessels remained more open. Fingers and toes stayed pliable longer. These changes were not dramatic, but cumulative, buying hours that otherwise would not exist. Position mattered. Infants were often placed against the chest or abdomen, where warmth remained most consistent. Wrapped loosely in hides or cloth, they stayed enclosed within a shared microclimate formed by breath, skin, and layered insulation. Movement during sleep adjusted coverage naturally, maintaining contact without conscious effort. This closeness extended through the night. When adults shifted, infants shifted with them. When heat pooled beneath shelter roofs, both benefited. Fire softened the air, but bodies provided continuity. Even when embers dimmed, shared warmth continued its work, holding temperature steady through the coldest hours before dawn. Group sleeping amplified this effect. Multiple adults created a warmer interior space, allowing infants to remain sheltered on all sides. Heat flowed not from a single source, but from many, reducing strain on any one body. In this way, the group absorbed risk collectively, distributing warmth where it was needed most. Archaeological evidence suggests that infants were not placed separately, even when space allowed. Their position within camps remained central, close to adults and away from edges where drafts pooled. Bedding beneath them was thick, layered carefully to reduce contact with frozen ground. These arrangements reflect understanding shaped by experience, not instruction. Closeness was not comfort alone, it was function. The infant body, still forming its own responses to cold, relied on borrowed warmth until strength and mass increased. Night after night, skin to skin contact allowed growth to continue despite conditions that should have ended it. Through this practice, Ice Age humans protected their future quietly. Babies survived not because the cold softened, but because warmth was shared deliberately and continuously. Life persisted through contact, through the simple act of holding on through the night. In those small, breathing spaces between bodies, survival found its most fragile and enduring form, carried forward by closeness until the sun returned once more. As Ice Age nights pressed inward, clothing became a quiet system rather than a simple covering. It worked not through thickness alone, but through arrangement, movement, and restraint. Worn correctly, it turned fragile skin into a surface that could hold warmth long after the sun had vanished. Fur direction mattered first. Animal hides were not random wrappings. When worn with fur facing inward, hairs leaned toward the skin, creating a soft barrier that resisted airflow. Each hair trapped still air, and still air slowed heat loss far more effectively than dense material. Worn outward, fur shed wind and moisture, protecting the insulating layers beneath. The same hide could behave very differently depending on how it was oriented, and this knowledge shaped how clothing was cut, layered, and worn. Air was the true insulator. Hides themselves conducted heat slowly, but their greatest strength lay in the space they created. Loose fits allowed air to remain motionless between layers and skin. Tight clothing compressed these pockets, stripping away insulation and increasing heat loss. Ice Age clothing balanced coverage with looseness, allowing warmth to accumulate without escaping. The goal was not to seal the body completely, but to surround it with air held gently in place. Moisture threatened this balance. Sweat, melting frost, or damp air collapsed insulating spaces. Wet fur flattened, air pockets vanished, heat flowed outward rapidly. Because of this, clothing was designed to manage moisture rather than eliminate it entirely. Layers absorbed sweat gradually, spreading moisture across larger surfaces where it could evaporate slowly without soaking through. Hides dried from body heat and fire rather than becoming saturated all at once. Multiple layers transformed this process. Inner layers focused on comfort and moisture control, staying close to the skin and moving as the body moved. Outer layers blocked wind and snow, taking on moisture before it could reach deeper insulation. Between them, air stayed trapped, warming and remaining stable. If one layer grew damp, others continued working, preserving insulation through redundancy. Layering also allowed adjustment. As activity increased, layers could loosen or be partially removed to prevent overheating. As rest approached, layers returned, sealing warmth back in. This flexibility mattered in environments where overheating could be as dangerous as cold. Sweat produced during exertion became a liability later if it remained trapped against the skin during sleep. Clothing extended beyond garments. Wrappings around feet, hands, and faces addressed areas of rapid heat loss. Footwear insulated against frozen ground. Mitts preserved shared warmth between fingers. Face coverings tempered inhaled air, protecting lungs from intense cooling. Each addition reduced strain on the body's internal systems, allowing them to work steadily rather than urgently. Together, these layers created a moving microclimate. Heat generated by the body circulated through trapped air, rising and settling without escaping. Cold slowed as it passed through fur, hide, and space. The body did not remain warm because of thickness alone, but because heat had nowhere easy to go. Ice Age clothing was not static. It shifted during sleep, adjusted through posture, and responded to fire and shelter. Its effectiveness depended on care and understanding, passed quietly through generations. In combination with bedding and shared warmth, clothing allowed sleep to remain restorative rather than dangerous. Through fur direction, air trapping, and careful layering, Ice Age humans learned to carry warmth with them. Their clothing did not fight the cold directly. It delayed it, softened it, and held it at the surface long enough for life to endure through another night, breathing steadily beneath layers shaped by experience rather than excess. As the body worked to survive the cold, it faced a quiet contradiction. The same systems that generated heat could also place life at risk. Sweat, normally a tool for cooling and balance, became dangerous when night settled and temperatures fell. In the Ice Age, moisture was never neutral. It altered how cold moved, how warmth escaped, and how quickly the body could lose control. Wet skin changed everything. Water conducted heat far more efficiently than air, and when skin or clothing became damp, warmth no longer lingered near the body. It flowed outward with speed and certainty. Even a thin film of moisture flattened insulation, collapsing the tiny air spaces that slowed heat loss. Once those spaces disappeared, cold reached the skin directly, drawing warmth away without resistance. This danger often began earlier in the evening, long before sleep. Activity generated heat, and heat produced sweat. Hunting, gathering fuel, building shelter, or tending fire all raised body temperature. The cold air masked this effort, making it easy to overwork without noticing moisture accumulating beneath layers. When movement stopped, sweat cooled rapidly, turning earlier exertion into a threat rather than protection. Ice Age people learned to manage this balance carefully. Clothing was adjusted continuously rather than worn rigidly. Layers loosened during activity, allowing excess heat to escape before sweat formed. When rest approached, layers were tightened again, trapping warmth once more. This rhythm prevented moisture from building against the skin, preserving insulation for the night ahead. Materials also mattered. Inner layers absorbed small amounts of moisture, spreading it across wider surfaces where it could evaporate slowly. Outer layers resisted wind and snow, preventing new moisture from entering. Furs dried gradually from body heat and fire, rather than becoming saturated all at once. Each layer had a role, and each depended on the others to maintain balance. Fire assisted in this process. Warm air near flames encouraged moisture to lift and drift away rather than condense. Clothing could dry gently without being removed, preserving coverage while restoring insulation. Shelters guided airflow so that dampness moved upward and outward rather than settling back onto sleeping bodies. These subtle adjustments reduced the risk of waking colder than before sleep began. Overheating carried its own dangers. Excess heat forced the body to sweat more aggressively, increasing moisture accumulation. In extreme cold, this set a trap. The warmer the body became during activity, the colder it could become later if sweat was trapped against skin. Managing effort became as important as managing insulation. Movements were deliberate, paced to avoid both exhaustion and excess heat. Sleep magnified the consequences of imbalance. Once resting, the body could no longer regulate moisture actively. Damp skin cooled faster. Shivering consumed energy more quickly. Internal reserves drained as the night progressed. What seemed like comfort earlier could unravel hours later, quietly and without warning. This understanding shaped daily rhythm. Tasks slowed as evening approached. Movements became efficient rather than forceful. Warmth was built gradually rather than rushed. These choices preserved dryness, allowing insulation to function as intended when vulnerability was greatest. In the Ice Age, survival depended not only on adding warmth, but on knowing when to release it. Sweat represented excess, a sign that balance had been lost. By controlling moisture, Ice Age humans protected the invisible boundary between body and cold. Through restraint as much as innovation, they kept warmth where it belonged, carrying it safely into sleep while the frozen world waited beyond shelter walls. When the night fully claimed the land, cold did not stop at the skin. It entered with every breath. Air drawn into the lungs carried the temperature of the dark itself, and over hours of sleep, that steady exchange shaped survival as surely as fire or shelter. Breathing was constant, unavoidable, and in extreme cold, quietly demanding. Cold air reaching the lungs cooled the body from the inside. With each inhale, warmth was given up to raise the temperature of incoming air before it reached delicate tissues. This happened automatically, without sensation at first, but the cost accumulated. The chest cooled slowly. Blood passing through the lungs lost heat continuously. Over long hours, this internal cooling added to losses at the skin and ground, deepening the body's challenge. During waking hours, movement and effort balanced this exchange. At rest, breathing became slower and deeper. Air lingered longer in the lungs, allowing more heat to be transferred outward. The body responded by narrowing airways slightly, conserving warmth while maintaining oxygen flow. This adjustment helped, but it could not eliminate loss entirely. Protection came from shaping the air before it reached the lungs. Face coverings played a crucial role. Fur, hide, or cloth placed over the mouth and nose trapped warm breath as it left the body. On the next inhale, incoming air passed through this warmed space, absorbing heat and moisture before reaching the lungs. This simple barrier softened extremes, reducing strain on internal systems through every respiratory cycle. Moisture trapped in coverings mattered as well. Exhaled breath carried warmth and water vapor. When retained briefly, it prevented airways from drying and cooling too rapidly. The covering did not seal breathing completely. It moderated it, creating a narrow buffer where temperature and humidity remained closer to the body's needs. Sleeping position reinforced this protection. People often curled inward, bringing face closer to chest or shoulder where warmth concentrated. This posture reduced exposure of the face to drafts and allowed exhaled breath to pool within shelter rather than dispersing immediately. The body folded around its own heat, guiding air along warmer paths before release. Within groups, positions were coordinated naturally, faces turned inward, away from shelter openings and wind paths. Those at the edges adjusted coverings and posture more tightly. Those at the center benefited from shared warmth, where air moved more slowly and retained heat longer. Breath from many bodies contributed to a warmer interior atmosphere, subtle but constant. Fire influenced breathing indirectly. Warm air rising from embers lifted cold layers upward, reducing sharp temperature differences at ground level where people slept. Smoke moved along these currents, carrying warmth outward before leaving the shelter. Breathing felt less harsh within this circulating air, easing internal cooling across the night. Care was required. Face coverings had to remain breathable. Materials too dense trapped moisture excessively, freezing and stiffening in severe cold. Knowledge passed through experience favored balance. Enough coverage to warm air without blocking it. Adjustments happened even in sleep, small movements that maintained comfort without waking fully. Breathing freezing air all night demanded constant compromise. The lungs gave warmth steadily, and the body responded by shaping air, posture, and space to reduce the cost. These strategies did not stop heat loss. They slowed it, stretching resilience across hours of unconsciousness. Through coverings, positions, and shared shelter, Ice Age humans learned to protect their airways quietly. Breath by breath, warmth remained just long enough to carry life through the dark. Morning arrived not because the cold withdrew, but because the body and its surroundings had guided air gently, keeping the invisible exchange within limits that sleep could survive. Within the shelter, fire offered warmth and light, yet it also released smoke that could quietly threaten the same lives it protected. Ice Age humans learned to live inside this balance, shaping spaces where warmth lingered and smoke moved away without choking the night. Survival required not the absence of smoke, but its careful guidance. Ventilation began with awareness of air as something that flowed rather than settled. Smoke rose naturally with heat, lifting toward ceilings and openings instead of spreading evenly through living space. Shelters were shaped to respect this movement. Entrances were placed lower than sleeping areas, allowing cooler, cleaner air to enter near the ground, while warmer air carried smoke upward and out. This steady exchange refreshed the shelter slowly, without stripping away precious warmth. Fire placement mattered just as much. Flames were rarely built directly beneath where people rested. Instead, fires sat slightly offset, allowing heat to spread across walls and roofs before reaching sleepers. Smoke followed the same path, guided along surfaces and upward rather than across faces. This separation reduced direct exposure while still warming the space evenly. Caves amplified these effects naturally. Their contours shaped air movement without effort or tools. Warm air rose along sloping ceilings, carrying smoke toward cracks, chimneys, or entrances high enough to release it safely. Cooler air flowed inward to replace what had moved out, feeding the fire gently and sustaining circulation through the night. These currents were slow and predictable, creating a stable interior environment rather than turbulence. In deep caves, distance played a role. Fires were placed where airflow was strongest, often closer to entrances or beneath natural vents. Sleeping areas remained deeper inside, where air moved more slowly and smoke thinned. Over time, soot patterns on stone revealed which placements worked and which did not, offering silent instruction to those who returned season after season. In open shelters and tents, ventilation relied on design rather than stone. Small gaps near roof lines allowed smoke to escape while limiting drafts. Hide flaps could be adjusted subtly, opening enough to guide smoke upward without collapsing warmth within. These openings were not fixed. They changed with wind, weather, and fuel, adjusted through habit rather than calculation. Fuel choice influenced smoke as well. Dry wood burned cleaner, producing less residue that lingered in still air. Fire was fed sparingly at night, favoring steady embers over roaring flames. This reduced smoke production while maintaining warmth, allowing the shelter to remain breathable through long hours of rest. Group behavior supported this balance. Movement was minimal during sleep, preventing disturbances that could alter airflow. Positions were chosen to keep faces away from smoke paths. Even unconscious shifts tended to preserve patterns learned through repetition as bodies settled into places where air felt easier to breathe. The body itself adapted quietly. Lungs accustomed to wood smoke tolerated low concentrations without distress, filtering particles over time. Breathing slowed during sleep, reducing inhalation of irritants. These adaptations did not eliminate risk, but they widened the margin within which smoke could exist without harm. Through these combined practices, Ice Age humans created living spaces where fire and breath coexisted. Smoke became a passing presence rather than a suffocating force, guided upward and outward by shape, placement, and patience. The shelter remained warm and breathable through the night, holding both flame and life in quiet balance until morning returned and smoke thinned into the open air once more. As Ice Age nights pressed their limits, not all human bodies met the cold in the same way. Alongside early modern humans lived Neanderthals, a close relative shaped by a longer intimacy with glacial climates. Their differences were subtle to the eye, yet profound in their effect, revealing how small changes in form could influence survival when warmth was scarce. Neanderthal bodies were compact and powerful. Shorter limbs kept arms and legs closer to the core, reducing surface area exposed to the cold. Broad chests housed large lungs, and thick bones supported dense muscle. This build favored heat retention. Warmth generated during movement lingered longer, traveling shorter distances before reaching the skin. In stillness, this compactness slowed cooling, offering an advantage during long nights of rest. Modern humans carried a different shape. Longer limbs and narrower frames reflected origins in warmer regions, where releasing heat mattered more than conserving it. This form supported endurance and long-distance movement, but it also allowed warmth to escape more readily. In extreme cold, heat traveled farther from the core to reach hands and feet, increasing loss unless balanced by clothing, shelter, and shared warmth. Fat distribution also differed subtly. Neanderthals tended to carry more mass relative to surface area, aiding insulation. Their bodies stored and retained warmth efficiently, relying less on external aids during short exposures. Modern humans, lighter and leaner, depended more heavily on technology to compensate. Neither approach was superior in all conditions. Each reflected adaptation to different environmental pressures. Heat retention shaped nightly survival. Neanderthals could tolerate brief lapses in shelter or fire without immediate collapse, their bodies buffering cold through form alone. Modern humans faced steeper consequences when systems failed, but developed strategies that extended beyond the body. Clothing, bedding, and structured camps allowed them to alter the environment rather than rely solely on biology. These differences influenced how groups organized themselves. Neanderthal sites often show dense occupation of caves, where natural insulation complemented their physiology. Modern human camps appear more flexible, spreading across open landscapes with portable shelters and layered technology. Warmth came from arrangement and planning rather than mass alone. Sleep revealed these contrasts clearly. As bodies rested and internal heat production slowed, Neanderthal compactness preserved warmth with less effort. Modern humans required careful preparation, precise layering, and proximity to others. Their nights demanded foresight rather than tolerance, but this reliance on systems encouraged innovation and social coordination. Neither group lived in isolation from these pressures. Both used fire, hides, and shelter. Both understood the night as a boundary that had to be managed. The difference lay in where survival margins rested. For Neanderthals, some margin existed within the body itself. For modern humans, it existed in tools, behavior, and shared knowledge. Over time, these strategies shaped endurance. The Neanderthal body excelled in cold stability, but required high energy intake to sustain its mass. Modern human bodies burned energy more efficiently and adapted rapidly through culture. In fluctuating climates, this flexibility proved valuable. Warmth could be rebuilt quickly through new techniques, even as environments shifted. The cold offered no absolute advantage. It rewarded balance between body and mind, form and foresight. Neanderthals met the Ice Age with bodies built to hold heat. Modern humans met it with systems built to create it. Both approaches carried strength. One leaned on anatomy shaped by generations of cold. The other leaned on adaptability, turning knowledge into warmth night after night, until the frozen world slowly changed around them. As daylight faded and the camp settled inward, survival quietly shifted from movement to metabolism. What had been gathered and eaten before rest became fuel for the longest hours of stillness. In the Ice Age, food did not end its purpose when chewing stopped. It continued working through the night, transformed into warmth inside resting bodies. Calories became heat through steady internal work. Digestion itself produced warmth, a subtle rise in temperature that lingered after meals. As the body processed food, chemical reactions released energy gradually, feeding muscles and organs even as activity slowed. This slow burn mattered during sleep, when shivering eased and external defenses carried more responsibility. Energy consumed before rest extended resilience into the coldest hours. Fat played a central role in this process. Dense and energy-rich, it released heat over long periods rather than all at once. Unlike sugars that burned quickly, fat sustained the body through extended stillness. Stored beneath the skin and around organs, it offered both fuel and limited insulation. During the night, these reserves were drawn upon carefully, converting mass into warmth when movement and awareness were absent. Eating before sleep was deliberate. It was not indulgence, but preparation. Meals were timed to ensure that digestion overlapped with rest, allowing internal heat production to align with vulnerability. A body that went to sleep hungry entered the night already depleted, its energy reserves too thin to meet the demands of cold. Even well built shelters and clothing could not compensate for an empty metabolism. This balance shaped daily rhythm. Energy intensive tasks happened earlier, leaving time for eating and settling before darkness fully arrived. As activity slowed, the body transitioned smoothly from external heat generation to internal support. The warmth carried into sleep was not leftover effort, but planned endurance. Food choices reflected this need. Fatty meats provided sustained fuel. Marrow and organ tissues were especially valuable, offering concentrated energy that lingered through hours of rest. These foods supported warmth without rapid spikes that would lead to sweating and later cooling. The night favored steady release over intensity. Group sharing extended this advantage. Meals were communal, distributing fuel evenly across the camp. Those with greater reserves indirectly supported others through shared warmth later on. Well nourished bodies contributed more heat to shared air, reducing loss for everyone nearby. Hunger weakened not only individuals, but the group's overall thermal balance. The absence of food revealed its importance starkly. Starvation narrowed the margin between warmth and cold. Without fuel, the body reduced heat production to preserve essential functions. Shivering weakened. Circulation slowed. Sleep became dangerous as metabolism lacked the resources to maintain stability. Nights that might have been endured became lethal through depletion rather than exposure. Over generations, this understanding settled into practice. Food was not wasted late in the day. It was saved for the hours when it mattered most. The night was approached fed rather than empty, supported by the quiet work of digestion continuing long after fires dimmed. Through this relationship, eating became part of shelter. Calories replaced lost sunlight. Fat replaced movement. Meals extended warmth invisibly from inside outward. In the Ice Age, survival through sleep depended not only on what surrounded the body, but on what it carried within, released slowly as heat, while the frozen world held its breath outside until morning returned. As the Ice Age world moved through seasons of scarcity, cold and hunger became tightly bound. One did not need to arrive violently to be deadly. When food ran short, the night grew sharper, even when the air itself had not changed. Starvation altered the body quietly, thinning its defenses until cold no longer needed force to enter. Thin bodies lost heat quickly. Without sufficient fat and muscle, there was less mass to store warmth and less insulation beneath the skin. Surface area remained the same, but internal reserves shrank. Heat generated during the day faded faster after sunset, leaving the body exposed to the long hours of stillness ahead. The cold did not feel different, but its effects accelerated. Low energy deepened this vulnerability. Calories once converted into warmth were no longer available. Metabolism slowed as the body attempted to conserve what little fuel remained. Shivering weakened, then faded entirely, not because the cold lessened, but because muscles lacked the energy to respond. Internal heat production dropped, narrowing the gap between stability and collapse. Hunger also changed circulation. Blood flow retreated further inward, protecting only the most essential organs. Extremities cooled rapidly, then deeper tissues followed. The body made rational choices, but those choices came with cost. Fingers stiffened, limbs lost strength. Sleep became shallower, not restorative, as internal systems worked to preserve function rather than recover it. Starvation stripped away timing. Well-fed bodies carried warmth into sleep through digestion. Hungry bodies entered the night already cold. Without fuel to process, there was no gentle rise in temperature, no delayed release of energy to buffer the coldest hours before dawn. The night stretched longer when there was nothing left to burn. Thin bodies also struggled to tolerate moisture and pressure. Bedding compressed more fully beneath lighter frames, reducing trapped air. Clothing fit differently, losing effectiveness as gaps formed where insulation should rest. The ground drew heat away faster. Every small loss compounded when there was no surplus energy to replace it. Group survival weakened as well. In shared sleeping spaces, undernourished bodies contributed less warmth to the collective. Heat sharing faltered not through distance, but through depletion. Those most affected became sinks rather than sources, drawing warmth from others until the group balance shifted. Cold spread socially, carried through contact and shared air. Archaeological patterns reflect this reality indirectly. Periods marked by nutritional stress often coincide with reduced occupation and increased mobility, suggesting camps could not endure when food failed. The cold had always been present, but starvation made it unforgiving. The body tried to adapt. Appetite faded as metabolism slowed. Movement became economical. Rest increased. These responses conserved energy, but they also reduced heat generation further. The body retreated inward, choosing endurance over strength. In some cases, this delayed collapse. In others, it hastened it by allowing temperature to fall unchecked during sleep. In the Ice Age, freezing was not always caused by exposure alone. Often, it followed hunger. Cold finished what starvation began. Without fuel, the body could no longer negotiate with the night. Fire, shelter, and clothing lost their effectiveness when internal warmth could not meet them halfway. Survival required fullness as much as protection. Warmth came from layers, from fire, from closeness, but it also came from within. When that source ran dry, the cold no longer needed patience. It flowed inward easily, filling the space where energy once lived, until sleep became stillness and stillness became silence. As winters stretched and nights grew long, darkness itself became an environment the human brain had to inhabit. The absence of light did more than hide the land. It reshaped rhythms inside the skull, influencing how rest unfolded, how stress accumulated, and how survival decisions were carried from one day into the next. Darkness arrived early and stayed late. With little moonlight and snow absorbing what illumination remained, the night pressed inward for many hours. The brain, guided by light more than any other signal, adjusted its timing. Wakefulness shortened, rest expanded. The boundary between day and night softened, allowing sleep to arrive earlier and linger longer. These extended periods of darkness encouraged deeper cycles of rest, slower transitions between alertness and stillness. Sleep itself changed character. Instead of a single long descent into unconsciousness, rest often broke into phases. Periods of lighter sleep surfaced briefly, allowing awareness to return just enough to sense the environment before drifting down again. This pattern conserved energy while preserving a fragile link to the surroundings. The brain remained quiet, but not unreachable, maintaining readiness without full wakefulness. Such rhythms reduce strain on the body. Extended darkness limited activity, decreasing energy loss when warmth was hardest to replace. Sleep cycles aligned with the length of night, allowing internal systems more time to repair and rebalance. Hormones tied to stress and metabolism adjusted gradually, supporting endurance rather than speed. Stress, however, did not disappear. It transformed. Long nights carried uncertainty, and the brain responded by sharpening memory and pattern recognition. Experiences of danger, shelter, failure, or warmth preserved were retained with clarity. The brain learned which arrangements worked and which did not. Embedding those lessons deeply, stress hormones rose not in panic, but in preparation, heightening focus during waking hours while easing during rest. This balance mattered. Too much stress drained energy and disrupted sleep. Too little dulled caution. Over time, the brain found a middle ground, maintaining alertness without constant tension. The night became a familiar state rather than an emergency. Darkness no longer signaled immediate threat, but a predictable phase that required patience and adherence to learned routines. Dreaming likely played a role in this adaptation. During long nights, the mind revisited experiences repeatedly, strengthening memory networks that guided future behavior. Routes to shelter, placement of fire, arrangement of bodies, and timing of meals were rehearsed quietly in sleep. These mental patterns carried into waking hours, shaping actions without conscious planning. Social bonds deepened under these conditions. Long periods of shared darkness encouraged closeness and synchronization. Sleep cycles aligned within groups, fostering coordination. Stress was distributed rather than carried alone, easing individual burden. The brain responded to this shared rhythm by reinforcing trust and familiarity, stabilizing camps through cooperation rather than constant vigilance. Over generations, these neural adjustments supported survival in subtle ways. The brain became comfortable with long stillness, with waiting, with enduring without action. It favored planning over reaction, memory over impulse. Darkness ceased to overwhelm. It became a space within which life continued quietly. In the Ice Age, survival depended not only on protecting the body from cold, but on allowing the mind to adapt to night itself. Through altered sleep cycles and moderated stress, the brain learned to live inside darkness without fear or urgency. Long nights did not break the human mind. They reshaped it, guiding thought and rest into rhythms that matched the frozen world, steady and patient until light returned once more. As the season turned and skies grew restless, the most dangerous nights arrived without ceremony. Storms did not announce themselves as sudden disasters. They unfolded through sound and movement, reshaping the night in ways that stripped away the careful balance built through preparation. Snow, rain, and wind altered the environment all at once, testing every layer of protection that usually held the cold at bay. Snow seemed gentle at first. It drifted down quietly, softening the world and dulling sound. Yet as it gathered, weight became its hidden force. Shelters sagged, openings narrowed. Fire struggled for air as snow packed around entrances and vents. Inside, light dimmed as flakes reflected what little glow remained. Outside, paths vanished, burying landmarks beneath uniform white. Heat loss increased as snow melted from contact with shelter walls, drawing warmth outward through moisture before refreezing into denser cold. Rain carried a different threat. In temperatures near freezing, it soaked clothing, bedding, and hides, collapsing insulation in minutes. Water seeped downward, pooling on the ground and flattening layers meant to hold air. Fire sputtered and smoked as fuel dampened. Warmth became uneven, present in brief pockets before draining away. Rain did not need intensity to be dangerous. Persistence alone was enough, saturating protection until the night claimed its advantage. Wind magnified every weakness. It forced cold air through seams, shifted shelter walls, and scattered embers that once burned steadily. Warm air was stripped away faster than it could be replaced, carried off into the dark. Sound changed direction, making orientation difficult even within familiar camps. Wind turned small gaps into open channels, reshaping interior air with relentless pressure. These elements combined into moments where shelter could fail quietly. A hide flap loosened, a support shifted under weight, an entrance collapsed inward. The interior climate changed abruptly, not through exposure alone, but through loss of control. Heat escaped unevenly, smoke lingered where it once flowed away, bedding dampened. The body, already resting, absorbed these changes slowly, often too slowly to respond. Storm nights compressed time. Tasks that were simple by day became difficult in darkness and noise. Repair demanded movement and energy at moments when conservation mattered most. Fire required constant attention to survive wind and moisture. Each action carried risk, each delay reduced options. The margin between stability and collapse narrowed until only habit and coordination held the camp together. Not every shelter endured. Some nights ended in abandonment. Archaeological traces show camps vacated hastily, leaving behind tools and structures not meant to be left. These moments suggest storms that overwhelmed preparation, forcing movement despite darkness and cold. Survival meant choosing exposure over collapse, stepping into uncertainty rather than remaining within failing walls. Those who endured storms learned restraint. Shelters were reinforced before weather arrived. Drainage was considered. Firewood was dried and stored. Bedding was layered with extra care. These choices reflected memory carried forward, shaped by nights when storms erased comfort entirely. Storms revealed the truth beneath Ice Age survival. Protection was never absolute, it was temporary, dependent on constant negotiation with elements that could change without warning. Snow muted the world. Rain dissolved defenses. Wind rearranged spaces meant to be still. Together, they transformed familiar nights into tests that allowed no rest. Yet, even in these moments, survival continued through patience and adaptation. Storms passed, shelters were rebuilt, lessons settled quietly into practice. The most dangerous nights were endured not through strength, but through understanding that safety was fragile and that holding warmth through chaos required preparation, flexibility, and the willingness to move when the night no longer allowed stillness. As seasons turned and the land shifted between brief warmth and long cold, survival followed a rhythm older than memory. Ice Age life was not built around a single shelter or place, but around movement and adjustment, guided by the understanding that no strategy worked year-round. The difference between summer and winter shaped every decision, especially those made before nightfall. During warmer months, the world opened. Daylight stretched longer, and temperatures softened enough to ease the strain of constant heat preservation. Camps expanded outward. Shelters grew lighter, sometimes little more than windbreaks or temporary coverings. Fire remained important, but its role shifted toward cooking, protection, and social gathering rather than constant survival. Nights were still cool, but they allowed rest without the same precision demanded by winter. Summer camps often followed resources. People moved closer to water, game paths, and seasonal plants, choosing locations for abundance rather than insulation. Mobility increased. Equipment became lighter. Bedding thinned. The ground felt less hostile, allowing more flexibility in sleeping arrangements. These months were not carefree, but they offered space to recover energy, repair tools, and raise children without constant cold stress. As the seasons darkened and temperatures fell, movement slowed and then redirected. Winter demanded consolidation. Camps drew inward toward sheltered landscapes where wind broke against stone and terrain offered protection. Caves, valleys, and wooded areas became anchors rather than choices. Distance between groups shortened as warmth and shared resources grew more valuable. Winter shelters reflected this shift. Structures became heavier, layered, and enclosed. Hide tents thickened. Bone huts gained additional coverings. Cave interiors were rearranged to maximize retained heat. Fire moved closer to sleeping areas, and ventilation was adjusted carefully to preserve warmth. Bedding deepened, and sleeping spaces shrank, focusing heat where bodies rested. Movement did not cease entirely. Instead, it became strategic. Camps relocated short distances rather than traveling far, following game migrations or adjusting to snow accumulation and wind patterns. These moves were calculated, often timed between storms or during brief windows of relative calm. The goal was not expansion, but stability, maintaining a balance between access to food and protection from exposure. Summer and winter also reshaped social organization. Larger groups often gathered during colder months, sharing labor, warmth, and risk. Summer allowed dispersal, with smaller camps spreading across the land. These shifts reduced pressure on local resources while strengthening bonds during hardship. Knowledge moved with people, carried across seasons, and shared where it was needed most. Shelters themselves evolved across the year. Temporary structures were dismantled or abandoned when they no longer served. Materials were reused, layered, or stored for colder months. Nothing remained static. The landscape was not conquered, but listened to, with camps responding to subtle changes in temperature, wind, and snowfall. This seasonal awareness extended to sleep itself. Summer nights allowed lighter coverings and looser arrangements. Winter sleep demanded compression, proximity, and careful preparation. The body learned these rhythms alongside the land, adjusting expectations and effort as conditions shifted. Seasonal survival was not reactive, it was anticipatory. Choices made during warmth prepared for cold yet to come. Food was stored, tools were repaired, shelters were tested and refined. These actions softened the shock of winter rather than eliminating it. Through movement and adaptation, Ice Age humans turned time itself into a resource. Seasons became guides rather than enemies. By shifting camps, changing shelters, and adjusting rhythms, they allowed life to persist across extremes, resting through nights shaped not by resistance alone, but by careful alignment with a world that never stayed the same for long. Long after the last fire cooled and the shelters collapsed, the ground remembered. Archaeology approaches Ice Age sleep quietly, not through bones alone, but through patterns pressed into soil, ash, and layered debris. These traces reveal how nights were endured, not in single moments, but through repeated habits that left subtle, enduring marks. Fire remains are often the clearest signals. Hearths appear again and again in similar positions within sites, rarely random. Ash layers build gradually, suggesting fires tended carefully rather than burned fiercely. Charcoal fragments vary in size, pointing to slow, controlled heat instead of roaring flames. In many shelters, hearths sit slightly off-center, close enough to warm, but far enough to prevent smoke accumulation. This placement speaks of nights planned with precision, where sleep and fire shared space without interfering with one another. The depth of ash tells its own story. Thin, repeated layers suggest nightly maintenance, embers banked rather than extinguished. Sudden thick deposits, followed by abandonment, hint at disruption, storms, or fuel shortages that ended a camp's use. Through these quiet variations, archaeology captures the rhythm of evenings settling into rest and mornings rebuilding warmth. Beneath and around hearths, bedding layers emerge. Compacted grasses, crushed leaves, and traces of moss appear as flattened mats distinct from surrounding soil. These layers are often renewed, with older bedding compressed beneath fresher material. The repetition suggests intention rather than accident. Sleep did not happen wherever bodies fell. It happened where insulation was prepared and maintained. In some sites, bedding lies several layers deep, forming soft platforms raised slightly above the surrounding ground. This elevation reduced contact with frozen soil and moisture. The materials are rarely mixed randomly. Plant fibers cluster together. Animal hair appears closer to where bodies would rest. Such organization points to knowledge refined over time, where comfort and survival overlapped. Shelter design becomes visible through post holes, stone arrangements, and bone placement. Circular patterns suggest tents or huts shaped to reduce surface area and hold heat. Walls curve inward rather than standing straight, guiding air and reinforcing structure against wind. Openings appear consistently oriented away from prevailing weather, confirming awareness of wind patterns learned through experience. Caves show different signatures. Soot marks climb walls and ceilings in predictable arcs, tracing the path of rising smoke. Sleeping areas cluster deeper inside, beyond the densest staining, where air was cleaner and warmer. Stone floors often show signs of leveling or clearing, preparing space for bedding rather than relying on natural contours. Across regions, similarities appear despite distance and time. The same relationship between fire and sleep repeats. The same layering beneath bodies persists. These parallels suggest shared solutions rather than coincidence, carried through migration and teaching rather than chance discovery. Archaeology also reveals what is absent. There are few signs of solitary sleeping spaces. Beds cluster. Hearths serve groups rather than individuals. This absence reinforces the social nature of warmth and rest, where survival through night depended on proximity and shared systems rather than isolation. Together, these traces form a quiet record of nightly life. They show that sleep in the Ice Age was not passive. It was structured, prepared, and preserved through small decisions repeated over generations. Fire, bedding, and shelter were arranged again and again in ways that worked. Through ash and fiber, stone and soil, archaeology reveals not just where people slept, but how carefully they did so. Each site reflects nights planned with patience, where survival rested not on chance, but on habits so consistent they pressed themselves into the earth and remained there, waiting to be noticed long after the last breath warmed the air. The skills that carried humans through Ice Age nights did not appear suddenly, nor were they written down or formally taught. They moved quietly from person to person, shaped by observation, repetition, and memory. Survival knowledge grew inside communities, carried by elders, refined through trial, and preserved as cultural memory long before language fixed it into story. Elders held the longest view. They had lived through many winters, felt storms fail and shelters succeed, watched fires die and fires endure. Their knowledge was not abstract. It was embodied, expressed through habit and correction rather than instruction. Younger members learned by watching how bedding was arranged, where fires were placed, how bodies were positioned before sleep. Guidance arrived through gesture and example, subtle shifts of placement that carried meaning without explanation. This transfer was constant. Each evening offered rehearsal. Each night reinforced lessons learned earlier. Mistakes were remembered not as errors, but as sensations. Cold creeping through damp bedding, smoke stinging eyes, wind finding gaps. Elders noticed these moments and adjusted future behavior. The correction itself became instruction, absorbed naturally by those who witnessed it. Trial and error shaped this process deeply. Not every method worked immediately. Early shelters collapsed, bedding materials failed, clothing soaked or froze. Fire placement filled spaces with smoke instead of warmth. These failures were costly, but they also clarified boundaries. Survival methods were selected not through theory, but through endurance. Practices that sustained life were repeated. Those that failed were abandoned quietly. Over time, patterns emerged. Certain arrangements felt safer. Certain materials held warmth better. Certain behaviors during storms preserved stability. These patterns did not need names. They were recognized through repetition and consequence. The body learned alongside the mind, remembering through comfort and discomfort which choices belonged to survival. Cultural memory formed through this accumulation. Knowledge lived not in individuals alone, but in shared routine. Entire groups moved, slept, and prepared in ways that reflected generations of refinement. When camps relocated, these habits moved with them. When groups merged, techniques blended, tested again against new landscapes and climates. Stories likely played a role, but not always as direct instruction. Experiences were retold softly, woven into daily life. A failed shelter became a remembered place. A successful arrangement became tradition. Memory anchored itself to landscape and season, reinforcing practices without rigid rules. Children learned early through proximity. They slept where others slept, felt warmth increase or fade based on arrangement, absorbed rhythms of preparation and rest. By the time conscious understanding formed, their bodies already recognized patterns. Knowledge arrived before explanation, embedded in muscle memory and expectation. Adaptation remained essential. No single method worked everywhere. As environments changed, cultural memory expanded rather than hardened. Elders recognized when old solutions no longer matched new conditions. Trial returned to the foreground, guided by existing principles rather than blind experimentation. This balance allowed continuity without stagnation. These skills endured because they were flexible. They did not rely on exact replication, but on understanding relationships between fire and air, body and ground, shelter and wind. Cultural memory preserved those relationships, allowing techniques to evolve while retaining their core purpose. Through elders, trial, and shared memory, Ice Age humans built a living archive of survival. It was not stored in objects alone, but in behavior repeated night after night. This quiet education allowed warmth to persist in cold worlds, carried forward through time not by record, but by people, passing knowledge as naturally as they shared fire, space, and sleep beneath the long frozen sky. As climates softened and technology accumulated, many of the skills that once carried humans through frozen nights began to fade. This change was not sudden, nor was it a failure. It was a quiet exchange where external systems replaced internal knowledge and comfort reduced the need for constant adaptation. Modern heating reshaped this relationship first. Fire became enclosed, regulated, and distant. Warmth no longer depended on placement, airflow, or shared attention through the night. Walls absorbed responsibility once held by habit. Temperature steadied into predictability, removing the need to listen closely to shifting air or subtle changes in heat. The body responded by relaxing its vigilance. The mind no longer rehearsed nightly arrangements because the environment no longer demanded them. Clothing followed a similar path. Layering became standardized rather than situational. Materials improved, insulating regardless of movement or moisture to a degree unknown before. Fit mattered less than before, and repair became optional rather than essential. These garments protected without teaching, replacing skills with products. Knowledge that once lived in hands and observation moved into manufacturing, where it no longer needed to be remembered to function. Shelters grew permanent. Floors lifted bodies away from cold ground. Windows controlled airflow without adjustment. Doors sealed spaces completely. These structures removed the need to read wind, terrain, and seasonal change with precision. Warmth arrived through switches and systems rather than shared effort. The night lost its capacity to instruct. Adaptation followed use. As challenges disappeared, the behaviors that answered them softened and then vanished. The body adjusted to stable temperatures, losing tolerance for prolonged cold exposure. Shivering thresholds shifted, circulation patterns changed. Sleep deepened into uninterrupted cycles, no longer shaped by environmental feedback. The brain learned a new rhythm, one based on consistency rather than alert endurance. This shift carried benefits. Energy once spent surviving cold nights could be invested elsewhere. Time freed from constant preparation allowed exploration, creativity, and growth in other directions. The loss of old skills did not weaken humanity as a whole, it redirected strength. Yet, something subtle was surrendered: the deep familiarity with night conditions, the ability to sense warmth through sound and movement, the comfort with stillness under harsh skies. These experiences became rare. Knowledge that had once passed naturally between generations no longer found context. Without practice, it could not survive as memory alone. Modern life favors efficiency over resilience. Heating and clothing solve problems completely rather than partially, removing the margin where adaptation once lived. The body follows this lead, optimizing for comfort rather than endurance. Adaptation continues, but toward different pressures, schedules, and environments. These changes also altered emotional connection to warmth. Heat became expected rather than earned. Cold became an interruption rather than a state to be navigated. The night softened into background rather than presence. Where once sleep required attention and cooperation, it became private and passive. What was lost was not intelligence or capability, but intimacy with constraint. Ice Age skills thrived because they were necessary. When necessity faded, so did the behaviors that answered it. Cultural memory requires practice. Without repetition, even the most refined knowledge dissolves quietly. Yet traces remain: the instinct to gather when cold arrives, the comfort found in layered bedding, the way warmth still feels communal, even indoors. These echoes persist, reminders of a time when survival depended on reading the night carefully. The loss of these abilities reflects success rather than decline. Humanity changed its environment so thoroughly that older adaptations no longer fit. In that success, the world grew safer, warmer, and more predictable. But beneath modern comfort, the old knowledge rests, not gone entirely, only waiting in the quiet places where cold still asks questions, and memory remembers how answers were once found. Even as the world changed and comfort became expected, traces of Ice Age sleep never truly vanished. They settled quietly into modern life, reshaped and refined, but still recognizable in how people prepare for rest. Blankets, beds, and shelters carry forward solutions, first shaped under frozen skies, where sleep depended on careful control of heat and space. Blankets are the most direct inheritance. At their core, they do the same work as layered hides and plant fibers once did. They trap air close to the body, slowing the escape of warmth through stillness rather than weight. The materials have changed, but the principle remains unchanged. Loft, softness, and layering matter more than thickness alone. Even today, the instinct to pull a blanket closer on cold nights echoes a deep understanding that warmth is preserved by minimizing movement of air around the skin. Layering blankets also reflects ancient logic. A single heavy cover often feels less effective than multiple lighter ones because layered air pockets adapt to shifting bodies during sleep. This mirrors Ice Age bedding, where grasses, hides, and furs were stacked carefully to maintain insulation even as sleepers turned through the night. Comfort follows the same physics now as it did then. Beds represent another continuation. Raised sleeping surfaces separate the body from the ground, reducing heat transfer into colder materials below. Modern mattresses achieve this through structure rather than natural debris, but the effect is identical. Distance from the ground matters. Softness alone is not the goal. Stability and separation preserve warmth by limiting contact with surfaces that drain heat away. The shape of beds also reflects shared warmth traditions. Larger sleeping surfaces allow closeness, whether between partners, families, or children and parents. Even in heated homes, people instinctively gather on colder nights, sharing warmth beneath covers. This behavior persists, despite temperature control, suggesting a memory deeper than convenience. Shelters complete the connection. Modern homes are controlled environments designed to trap warmth and block wind, echoing principles used in caves, huts, and tents. Walls reduce surface exposure. Small rooms retain heat more easily than large open spaces. Ceilings guide air movement. These designs reflect the same understanding that warmth depends on enclosure, shape, and flow rather than heat alone. Windows and doors serve as adjustable vents, regulating air exchange much like shelter openings once did. Insulation lining walls mirrors bedding beneath bodies, limiting heat loss across surfaces. Even the concept of heating individual rooms rather than entire buildings reflects Ice Age strategies of concentrating warmth where bodies actually rest. Sleep itself still follows ancient patterns. Bedrooms are often cooler than living spaces, but beds are warmer within them. This contrast mirrors Ice Age shelters, where surrounding air remained cold while sleeping zones were protected and layered. The body sleeps best when wrapped in warmth, not immersed in it. Light levels during sleep also echo older rhythms. Darkness remains essential for rest, even in cities washed with artificial glow. Curtains, shades, and lowered lights recreate night conditions that once shaped human sleep cycles. Silence and stillness are valued, reflecting nights where awareness softened but never vanished entirely. These habits persist, not because people remember their origins, but because they work. Ice Age sleep solutions endured because they aligned with human biology and physics. They required no explanation, only repetition. Modern life hides these connections beneath technology and design, but they remain present every night. Each blanket pulled closer, each bed raised from the floor, each shelter sealed against the cold reflects a legacy of survival refined through countless frozen nights. The warmth felt before sleep today is not new. It is familiar, shaped long ago, carried forward quietly into a world that rarely remembers how essential it once was. Night after night, across tens of thousands of winters, humans endured conditions that offered no forgiveness. There was no single moment of triumph. Survival was not won through one invention or one night of luck. It arrived through repetition, through the quiet success of sleeping, waking, and doing it again. The greatest challenge was not facing the cold once, but facing it endlessly, without certainty that the next night would be easier than the last. Each night demanded preparation. Fire had to be tended, bedding arranged, bodies positioned, food shared, shelter checked. None of these actions were dramatic on their own. What made them extraordinary was their consistency. To fail once could be fatal. To succeed meant continuing, holding knowledge and attention steady through exhaustion and scarcity. The Ice Age did not allow rest from vigilance. It required steadiness instead. Children were born into this world and learned it as their normal. They did not inherit warmth as comfort, they inherited it as responsibility. From their earliest nights, warmth was something maintained through closeness and routine. They slept wrapped among others, learned where fire belonged, absorbed rhythms of preparation without instruction. Cold shaped their growth quietly, setting expectations for effort and awareness long before memory could form. Growing up in such conditions required trust. Infants depended completely on others to regulate temperature. Their survival rested in shared systems, functioning without error. That trust extended outward as children aged, embedding cooperation deeply into human behavior. Night survival was never individual. It was communal, binding families and groups together through necessity rather than choice. Through these children, endurance became continuity. Each generation inherited not only bodies adapted to cold, but practices refined by those who came before. Knowledge did not reset with birth. It flowed forward, carried in routines repeated so often they felt natural. This continuity allowed humans to remain present in environments that should have pushed them away. The feat was not strength alone, it was restraint. Energy had to be conserved, movements measured, decisions timed. Survival favored patience over force. In this way, the Ice Age shaped a species capable of long planning and delayed reward. Sleeping safely through cold nights required thinking beyond the present moment, trusting that preparation would carry meaning hours later when consciousness faded. Endurance over such timescales reshaped humanity itself. Bodies adapted, brains adjusted, social bonds deepened. The need to survive nights together strengthened cooperation and shared responsibility. These traits carried forward into warmer eras, long after the cold released its grip. The Ice Age did not only test humans, it trained them. What makes this feat remarkable is its invisibility. There is no monument to nights survived, no record kept of successful sleep. Yet the species continued, expanding, adapting, persisting through climates that erased many others. Survival happened quietly, beneath hides and stars, within shelters that left little trace. This persistence allowed everything that followed art, language, exploration, and memory all depend on one simple achievement repeated countless times. People went to sleep and woke again. Children grew, knowledge accumulated, the species endured. In the Ice Age, humanity proved not that it could conquer nature, but that it could live within it patiently. Night after night, without spectacle, humans held warmth against the cold and passed life forward. That quiet endurance, sustained across generations, stands among the greatest feats our species has ever achieved. In the end, what remains most striking about Ice Age survival is its fragility. Human bodies were never strong enough to dominate that world. They were thin-skinned, slow to warm, and vulnerable once stillness set in. Night revealed these limits clearly. Without preparation, without care, sleep itself could become dangerous. Life persisted not because humans were built for the cold, but because they learned how to live beside it gently. Survival unfolded quietly. There were no grand victories against the night, no final moments when danger disappeared. Each evening repeated the same careful acts, arranging shelter, sharing warmth, tending fire, settling bodies together. These acts rarely changed, yet they carried life forward. The success of one night meant little on its own. The success of thousands shaped a species. This quiet endurance left few marks. Camps dissolved, fires cooled, bedding compressed into soil. What survived was not structure, but continuity. People woke, moved, and prepared again. Children grew within these routines. Their understanding of warmth formed before words. Cold was not feared dramatically. It was respected steadily, managed rather than challenged. Fragility shaped cooperation. No one survived alone for long. Warmth passed between bodies, between generations, between evenings and mornings. Knowledge moved the same way, not spoken loudly, but demonstrated until it became habit. The night taught patience and trust, reinforcing bonds that mattered far beyond temperature. Over time, this way of living settled into the human nervous system. Even as environments softened, traces remained. Warmth came to represent safety, care, and closeness. The simple comfort of being warm before sleep still carries emotional weight, not because it is luxurious, but because it once meant survival. The body remembers what the mind no longer needs to track. Modern life wrapped warmth in convenience. Walls, heaters, and fabrics create protection without thought, yet the response remains instinctive. People gather on cold nights, blankets are shared. Small spaces feel comforting when weather turns harsh. These reactions are older than memory, shaped by nights when closeness kept breath moving and blood warm. Warmth feels emotional because it once was uncertain. It could vanish with a shift of wind or loss of fire. To feel warm meant danger was held at a distance for a while. That relief settled deep, attaching safety to sensation rather than thought. Even now, warmth calms without explanation. The Ice Age did not just test humanity, it refined it. The need to survive quietly through darkness encouraged foresight, cooperation, and restraint. These traits outlived the cold that shaped them. They appear today not as survival tactics, but as preferences, habits, and comforts that still guide sleep. Looking back, it becomes clear that endurance did not require dominance or force. It required attention, repetition, and care. Humans were never masters of the Ice Age. They were participants within it, adjusting gently to conditions that could not be controlled. In that participation lies a quiet achievement. Fragile bodies learned to persist, nights passed without spectacle, life continued without certainty. Warmth was gathered, shared, and protected until morning returned. And perhaps that is why warmth still matters so deeply. It reminds us, without words, that survival once depended on small acts repeated faithfully. That life endured not through strength alone, but through patience, closeness, and the quiet decision to prepare for sleep, trusting that dawn would come again.